Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of your Brains Coach podcast. My name is Angela Sharina. I'm your host, I'm your Brains Coach, and just someone with a lot of passion, obsession, and energy for sharing with you guys all the brain tools you can use to feel, look, and do your absolute best. And today, guys, you're going to learn about how to speak as your best, how to speak as a leader, how to influence people's minds, change people's minds, and ultimately to produce change in the world that you seek to produce. Guys, today with me on the show, we have Simon Lancaster, one of the world's top speechwriters. Simon first became a speechwriter in the late 90s, working for members of Tony Blair's cabinet. Today, he writes speeches for the CEOs of some biggest companies. And Simon also is an author of the Definitive Guide to Speechwriting, the Expert Guide, the award-winning Minds, Secrets from the Language of Leadership, and You Are Not Human, How Words Kill. And his latest book, Connect, How to Inspire, Influence, and Energize Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime, is an absolute delight. I highly recommend this book, guys, as other books as well. Simon is an executive fellow of Henley Business School and lectures at both Cambridge and Oxford universities. Simon regularly speaks around the globe, and his Speak Like a Leader TEDx talk has been watched more than 3 million times on YouTube, guys. Today, you're going to be blown away by the amount of practical information, amount of practical tools that you can use to speak like a leader, to influence, to inspire, to educate, to produce change. You're going to learn about what is the best way to start your speech, to get your audience attention, to get everyone to connect what you're saying, how metaphors work and why it's such a powerful tool to get people feel like you understand them, how to use metaphors to connect with people faster and deeper, persuade them, make them believe, to ultimately take desired action. Metaphors as a way to understand other people's perspective, beliefs, and worldview, to meet people where they are. 5 types of metaphors that absolutely everyone understands as long as they're human. Using the metaphors that one cannot relate to is a sure way to lose this person. Using metaphors as an educator, a coach, an influencer to help people understand and learn faster and better. What can help you break through as a leader, as a speaker, especially in the corporate world? Importance of body language and your voice that are more important than what we say. The importance of stories to make your message cut through the noise and sink in people's minds. Personal stories, a shortcut to demonstrate who we are, what our life is all about, and why people should care about our message. If you're a leader, want to increase people's productivity, tell personal stories. How stories help us learn and teach and even quit smoking. Stories, the ultimate tool to change behavior, build and break habits, change yourself and people around you. Why stories work, most powerful neurotransmitters, how to tell stories that change people's minds. 3 must-have ingredients of a mind-changing story. Tools to connect to the logical part of people's brain to make what we say more believable and credible. Why intellectual arguments on their own don't work, and why we have to care about how we present our arguments. What Barack Obama learned the hard way. Why breathing is important in public speaking, and how to use it to change your state, turn off public speaking jitters, and impact your audience's minds. Excite them, calm them down, make them connect to what you say. And at the end of this episode, you're going to learn a 6-step structure to create a powerful speech or a piece of content on any subject, anytime, anywhere, to start speaking like a leader. So guys, without further ado, please tune in, please stay tuned, and then learn and use these tools to be a great leader, a great speaker, to influence, to impact, to energize, to change people's minds and the world. Welcome to Your Brains Coach podcast, Simon. And I'm so happy to have you on this podcast. I'm such a huge fan of your TED Talks and your books and just your work and social media content. Thank you for coming on the show to share your wisdom and expertise.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's great to see you, Angela. I mean, we've been in touch a little on social media over the last few months, so it's great to finally see you face to face.
Yes, it's always so great. I was just thinking to myself today, I feel so fortunate because in our days, we can interview authors, writers like yourself, who we are inspired by, who will learn a lot from, and ask all the questions that we have in our heads, still, because as an author, probably, right, you can only put so much in your work, like in your book, for example, and there is so much more that you still have in you to share.
No, there's nothing left. There's absolutely nothing left. In actual fact, the books are actually, there's more than I know in the books. So what can I do? I'm just going to sit here actually and just read to you from the book. That's what I'm proposing to do.
Okay, you're joking. Jokes, laughter, as I know from your books, one of the best ways to connect with people, right? And to have an impact and to help people, trust and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I always love when I'm working with clients. So I'm a speechwriter. That's what I do. Yeah. That's most of my job. There's no better way to start a speech than a joke. It's just such a great way of relaxing the audience, getting them all on your side. Not always, obviously, not if there's just been a tragedy. It's not always appropriate. But in most other circumstances, when you're just looking, you're sharing knowledge or you're trying to inspire people or whatever, starting with a joke is a great one.
Simon, you are a speechwriter. Your company Bespoke Speech Writing Services in London, I believe, right? Yes.
Yes. Kind of. I work globally now. I mean, I'm London born and bred. And I've got a flat in London, but I actually live with my family out in the Brecon Beacons. We've got a gorgeous house on top of a mountain, and I travel an awful lot for work, not during the school holidays. I have a rule because I've got two daughters who are aged 14, 11. So I'm always with them during the school holidays. But when they're at school, I basically can be anywhere in the world. So literally just looking back over the last month, I've been to Copenhagen 3 separate times. I've been to the Netherlands once, and I've been to New York as well. So, I mean, this is the wonderful thing about the way that people work today now, though. You can work anywhere in the world as long as you've got your laptop, you're ready to go.
Yeah, it's a beautiful world. What can I say? And I even learned about your work actually from the talk that you did in Verona, Italy. That's a TED Talk, yeah. And after that, I was just fascinated with your work and how you teach speech writing and public speaking, right? And then also wanted to give listeners a little bit more background. So your recent book, Connect, and the subtitle is How to Inspire, Influence, and Energize Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime. And that's where I got introduced to your books, right? And I learned so much from that book. But then I want to know a little bit more about the science of that, right? Dig deeper and to look under the hood. And that's why I picked up your the book that was previously published, Winning Minds, Secrets from the Language of Leadership. And that one I absolutely loved because I'm a huge fan of neuroscience. And I wanted to interview you to share with our listeners a few most important tools, techniques, tips, how to speak to have the impact that we seek to make on our audiences. And then also a little bit more neuroscience, why exactly it works.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds brilliant. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about, Angela. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's start with, I think, one of my favorite things that I'm working on getting bad at, metaphors. Yeah. Like, how do they work? How people can start, I don't know, in an easy way using them, and how do they work? Why should we use metaphors in our speaking?
I mean, metaphors are insane. When we use metaphor, we're talking about something as something which it is not.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, completely absurd. So, you might talk about, I might say to you now, metaphors plant ideas in people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Or I might say to you that metaphors are really loaded. Or I might say to you that metaphors can really make your text sparkle. And so in all of those sentences there, I'm using different metaphors to explain to you what a metaphor is.
Yeah.
But each one of those, I'm conjuring up a different image, which will then lodge in your mind and will suggest to you certain feelings, emotions, behaviors. So if I say to you, it plants ideas in people's minds, then we're using obviously a seed metaphor, a gardening metaphor. Yeah. Beautiful, lovely, quite natural, wonderful. This is the way you cultivate opinion. If I say to you, metaphors are very loaded, then I think that might suggest a gun. And that might be a bit violent for some people, not necessarily if you're engaged in communication, which is quite combative. So, for instance, when I'm talking to lawyers, lawyers love the gun metaphor. People in politics, they'll be like, yeah, you've got no idea. I'm always having to defend myself and I always feel like I'm under attack. So metaphors can really help me. That'd be something. So then I'll really lean into that and be like, well, wow, metaphors, they're like the nuclear weapon of communication, it'll obliterate your opponent's argument. And so this is the thing. We use metaphor all the time. We use metaphor once every 16 words on average. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to speak for long without reaching for a metaphor. But whilst we often think of metaphors as being something poetic, their power is actually far greater than that. Their real power comes from persuasion. And so heaps of studies have shown how change in metaphor can lead people to very, very different reactions on all sorts of questions, ranging from whether they'll invest in a company, support policies, even back a foreign war. So they're very powerful.
Mm-hmm. It's I think what I really understood about metaphors and while reading your books and watching and listening to your content is that our mind thinks in pictures first, like the language came later, right? And what metaphor does, it helps to communicate to that mind. That is much when we influence that mind, it has much more powerful effect on our listener, right? They understand it, as you said, like instantly. And what they understand and what they picture, it leads them in different directions. And I think the power comes from understanding that and using that with purpose. Like, how do you want your audience to feel? Where do you want them to go, right? And I remember talking to a friend, and we were talking about relearning writing for social media, and I use this metaphor. For me, using this format for writing for social media compared to long form writing, it's like learning to walk. And he immediately, understood it, and he's like, "You're so good at metaphors." Whereas, it made him feel like I was feeling. So anything else you have to say about metaphors? Like, I don't know, any tips or maybe how to start with that easier, because some people are not that natural with using metaphors.
Yeah, I think if you listen to the way people speak and you look out for the metaphors that they're using, it can give you great insight to their state of mind. Mm-hmm. So if you want to understand someone's perspective on something, when we speak about people having a point of view or a perspective, we're using the language of imagery. I don't see things that way. This is the way that a lot of the time differences of opinion will manifest through metaphors. And so the key for me to understanding someone's view of the world is listening to their metaphors. Mm-hmm. And so if someone's saying to you, like, if you're a boss at work and, one of your team is saying, I feel like you just keep pulling the rug from under my feet, then that gives you clear insight to their state of mind. And you're like, if you then respond to them saying, well, we're driving this through, we need to drive this strategy through, then, they're like, oh God, I don't feel steady on my feet. And now you're driving a car at me. This is like the worst thing you can say. Listen to their metaphor and then take their metaphor and say, no, you're on solid ground. You're on solid ground. We're not moving. But what's happening is that around you, there are these changes going on, just very basically tuning into what people are saying. So when I'm like pitching to people for work, if they say to me, we want to unlock the talent of our top team, then that gives me a clear idea to the way that they see it, So my response to them should be like, well, the key comes in understanding ancient rhetoric and neuroscience. And then they're talking about unlocking, I've got the key, boom. We're on the same perspective. Whereas a lot of the time, when you get these big arguments going on, like, is social media a good thing or a bad thing? Mm-hmm. Should we have lockdowns on COVID? Should we not? Was Brexit a good thing? Was it a bad thing? A lot of the time, the way that people actually conceptualize these things, they visualize those things, they do so through metaphor. And so understanding people's metaphors is key. So for people who were pro the European Union, they saw the European Union as a family. So they're not obvious. Who wants to leave their family? So it makes no sense to leave. Whereas Brexiteers, they didn't see the EU like that. They saw it like a prison. So of course you wanted to be set free. And yet both sides in that debate were not really listening to one another, because they weren't listening, they weren't understanding their metaphors. If they'd have listened to one another's metaphors, they'd have been able to convince and cajole a little bit more effectively. Whereas as it was, you just ended up with a thick wall between both sides.
Yeah, I think, actually, this made one insight really clear for me. It's not just about, communicating your own image. It's also about listening the imagery that the other side communicates with, and then adjusting your language to meet them where they are, right?
Yeah.
Feeling and the imagery. Yeah, that I think is very powerful. Otherwise, you'll end up like the other person or your audience will end up feeling like you don't really get them or not listening.
Oh, no, on a really bit, and it does make such a difference to the way people feel. Yesterday, I was speaking to someone yesterday who was talking about how they've missed their targets. They've missed their targets. And if you've got the metaphor of target and it's like, or goal or whatever, then that language does suggest that anything other than hitting is a failure. It counts for nothing. Whereas if you talk about using journey metaphors about your destination, then that's different. And it leads you to a completely different image, different thought. No, you've made progress. You are moving along. You're going in the right direction. Fine, you've not got there yet, but you're going to get there in a couple of weeks. And it doesn't matter. Whereas target and goal, as we've seen in the World Cup, Harry Kane, it doesn't make a difference if you're just like a few inches out. You have missed. It's nothing. Yeah. You've scored nothing. Whereas thinking about it in terms of progress, much more effective. So it can make it in this way, understanding metaphor, you can make a difference to how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the world, how other people feel about the world as well. And it makes such a big difference doing no more than changing the metaphor in a piece of text. You swing people from being massively against things to massively in favor. No change to the facts, just change the metaphor.
Just change the metaphor, and then that changes the perspective, right, of the person. And the last point I think about metaphor that I found very useful is using like 5 kinds of metaphors that most people will relate to, like the journey or the body, weather, nourishment, and then relationships, right? Like you were talking, for example, about football or soccer, for people in different parts of the world. And for me, as not a person not into that at all, I would probably not get any of those, right? Except for like the basic ones. So I think that's important for people to also understand, like make sure your audience has this context of the metaphor that you're about to use.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I think the body is the most powerful source of metaphor that you can get to, because every single person on the planet has in common the experience of what it means to have a mouth, to smell beautiful things, to touch things, so all of that, to get the grip, so all of that kind of stuff is universal. And because most of my clients are global, and the speeches I write may well be translated into 30 plus languages for different offices around the world, you need to ensure they're going to resonate all over the place. And you're right, a lot of people don't care for football, they don't care, or other sports, or war metaphors, indeed, war metaphors that some people can love. And for other people, they're just like, oh God, no.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a little bit on that side, fight, wars, etc. It just doesn't feel right for me. I'm a coach, I'm always like taking people on a journey. So for me, something like war and fight, it's so just unnatural to use with people, because it's kind of like anti-progress, that gradual progress.
Do you do this with your clients? Do you listen to their metaphors and find stuff out about them from that?
Now more, but I wasn't listening to the metaphor specifically before a lot, right? Yeah. I would kind of just try to tune in the feeling more, like, read their body language, their emotional expressions on their faces, but metaphors and language tools, not so much. Now I'm getting more and more into that though.
Yeah, because I find a lot of the time that you can see that sometimes if they're not even articulating the metaphor, they'll show it in their body language, and so you can see something there. So you're like, oh, I don't quite know how to put it, and it's like you can see they've got a fight metaphor just brewing there, and it's not coming out yet, but you can just read from the clenched fist what's going on there, and sometimes you can see people like, I don't know, I just can't, I can't get through this, and they're actually creating a barrier with their hands as they describe it. And then I find it can be quite amusing, actually, just to sit. We'll make it a challenge, right? I'm going to get you to break that barrier during the
I see what you mean. Yeah, you can read body language. And in your book, Winning Minds, I think also in the Connect, they kind of, together in my mind, you talk about like the style and the posture, the body language, how it also communicates so much more than people usually give, credit. And if we want to create certain mood or energy or impact our audience in a certain way, like we really gotta, figure out how to use our body or gestures in a way that that will move people in the direction we want them to go.
It's so important, because I find so many corporate presenters that it's almost like they've been trained by hypnotists. And I don't know what's going on, but it's like they'll do the whole hypnosis thing about like just speaking from down here, and their body language will be completely still. And it's almost like they're trying to turn their audience to sleep, send their audience to sleep. And I'm like, why are you doing that? If you want to get people going, be talking like this, have your voice up here, and it so evidently works. Whereas the stiff, hands by side, low voice, it so obviously switches people off. I think it's so easy actually for people to break through in corporate communication, because so much of it is just bloody awful. You only need to be half decent for people to say, wow, that was amazing.
I can so agree. Yeah, sometimes you listen or watch corporate speeches or events, etc., and it's like, if I were to be excited about my work the way you speak, I don't know if I ever had, any work. It's enthusiasm and our postures and gestures, they really influence other people and create certain reactions and then drive action. I think the next point that I want to move towards, because I believe it's just so important, is storytelling and maybe simplifying it for people, right? Because what I learned, like through creating a lot of content, communicating to people through different media, is that unless you tell a story, it's almost guaranteed to like fail, whatever you're trying to do or make people do, or change their opinion or mind. Like you gotta incorporate stories in your communication. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more like your perspective on stories and why they work and how people can start in a simple way to incorporate stories if they're not used to that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you get in so many companies is that they will just assert things to you. They'll just say, like, we are courageous, we are curious, we are collaborative. And you'll talk to people about this and you get no sense of this whatsoever. Whereas the way that we're really convinced of someone's values, their virtues, their behaviors is through, well, mainly what we see them do, but also by the kind of stories that they tell. So rather than simply saying, you know, if I say to you now, like, I'm a kind person, how convincing is that? It's like, it just doesn't cut through. Whereas if someone can tell a story which shows that they believe in the power of kindness, and it might be something that happened when they were a kid, it might be something that one of their parents said to them. It might be something they saw someone do on the streets that day. It might be someone at work who did something nice. But tell me a story and transport me somewhere. And then it's because the story generates these images in our mind. And as we were saying earlier, we think in images. This is how you really bring the brain to life. Then all of a sudden people are engaged, and this is how you convince them. So this is what I do with my clients quite a lot, where, for instance, if they're the CEO of a company and they have as their values, like, you know, kindness, courage, compassion, whatever it is, and then I'll get them, like, you know, I'll get them so they're feeling nicely relaxed, and I'll say, just close your eyes and, you know, think back through the course of your life. And I'd like you to think back to the first time in your life when you discovered the importance of kindness. And I'll do this with people, and they'll come out with the most incredible stories. And it may be like, you know, one of my clients the other day was telling about her parents. And on Christmas Day every year, her parents used to just drive out in their car. The dad would drive out. He'd be like almost like a taxi driver on Christmas morning, going around and collecting all of the people in their local community who had nowhere else to go on Christmas Day. And she gave me then a detailed description of everyone who was sitting around her Christmas table, almost what they were wearing, what they were eating, and certainly some of the things that they were trying to overcome. Like some people there, one woman who had clearly had mental health problems, and she was unable to connect with other people. So she rarely spoke at these Christmas dinners. And you're just, you know, so you're taken somewhere, you are transported somewhere. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I believe that you believe in the power of kindness. It's not just an assertion. I can see why, you know, how you tick. Stories, just so powerful. And the thing for me as a speechwriter, I work with clients and it's transactional. You know, they pay me for my time. And yet when they tell me these stories and when I do these exercises with them, they then have me almost in tears by the end of it sometimes. And I then feel so emotionally connected to them. I almost don't want to charge them. I'll just work for them for nothing, which is precisely the point, that this is the power of stories. That when we understand people's stories, we understand where people are coming from, we understand their values, what motivates them, then we will work harder for them. And so this is why, for me, writing for leaders, if I can get someone telling stories, they can lift the performance and the productivity of their workforce exponentially just by telling one story. So people are like, then it's not transactional. I now have an emotional relationship with you, maybe because you suffered the loss of a parent when you were young, and therefore I did too, and therefore we've now got a deep connection. And when CEOs tell a story like this, and they can tell it, some of the speeches that I write will go out literally to like a couple of 100,000 people, and then they'll have people saying to them, ages, I've got that as well. I didn't realize you suffered from anxiety, you suffered from depression when you were younger or whatever. And they've then got a connection. And this is what being a human being is all about, isn't it? It's connecting with other people. Stories are amazing.
Yeah. And I believe that you can't really influence people unless you connect with them, right? And stories help us to connect to each other, because we talk about something that we can relate to, all of us, going through different life experiences. It also, I believe, for people like yourself or myself who are trying to help other people, educate them in some way, deliver knowledge, right? Something that can help them in their lives or business. I believe that we absolutely need to use stories as a tool to deliver that knowledge. The other day, I read a lot of books, and I finished one book. It was about creativity, and it was written all in stories, right, and examples. And I remember so much more of this book, like it's so alive in my brain. And then there was another book, it was like concept after concept after concept. And by the page 20 or something, I'm like, I cannot read any of that. I do not remember a thing. Yeah. And it made, to me, I'm like, yeah, it really works. Like that's it. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if the book is longer or it takes, many more pages to explain the concept. What matters is what I actually take away.
Yeah. And you do so through stories, and you do so through images. This is how my life was transformed during my 20s, actually. With all of the big things, it was when I was a chain smoker. I smoked 40 cigarettes a day. And I did patches and I did all sorts of things. And then I read that amazing book, Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking, and it has these powerful, it's like 25 years ago, I think, that I read the book. Yeah, I can still remember the image that he had in there. He said, I remember there was one chapter that said, you probably started smoking when you were at school, and you probably had the picture of James Dean smoking a cigarette on your wall. And I was like, how did he know? I did, and that was the image. That was the image. If you were a kid smoking, you were like James Dean. You probably thought it made you look big and strong and all of this kind of stuff. And then he said, now, let me tell you how life ends for smokers. There's someone at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London, and literally they've just had one of their legs amputated because of their smoking. And the doctor is saying to them, if you don't stop smoking now, we are going to have to amputate the other leg, within 6 months. And because you're so weak now, the cigarettes have made you so weak, you're so craven to them, you can't give up. How strong are you now? And I'm telling you this 25 years after reading the book. How many weeks is that? How many months is that? How many days is that? And those images are still in my mind. And that's how you change behavior, through very simple images, metaphors, stories that then plant deep in our subconscious, deep in our instinctive brains. And this is how you achieve change. And you could do it with things like giving up smoking, or, cheering up, getting through anxiety or depression, whatever. But you can do it with getting the best out of people as well at work, which for me, writing for CEOs and writing an inspirational speech for CEOs, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Such a powerful example. And, because you told us personal story, I'll probably remember it for a long time too, how reading stories change you to change your, health in a big way. So, and I'd love to maybe dig a little bit deeper into neuroscience and why stories work. I remember in your book that I read, that we first connect through to the character and our brain releases like oxytocin. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, like how it works? Because a lot of our listeners are into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my perspective on a lot of communication is ancient rhetoric meets neuroscience. So there is that intersection that I find generates a lot of energy for me. And Aristotle was the master of storytelling, and he said that there were 3 elements to a great story. So you had pity, fear, and catharsis. So you have pity, you feel a connection with the protagonist in the story. Then fear, the protagonist is up against a problem. And then catharsis, you're waiting for the problem to resolve. Now, if you look at the neurochemistry of that, when we experience pity with a protagonist in a story, we feel that sense of connection with them. That gets the oxytocin going, making us feel all warm and fuzzy and huggy as they tell us about their life story. Then as you get the fear, they come up against the problem. That gets the cortisol going. So this is like the stress drug, but it makes you focus on whatever the dilemma is that they're talking about. And then as you wait for catharsis, that moment of resolution, that's the reward network being activated. So the whole dopamine thing is going on. So that's like the neurochemistry of a story. And I mean, it's an interesting way to think about it, because you're like, so you're then like, okay, so a really good story, you need to feel really connected with the character at the beginning of it. And this explains why some stories are bad, why they don't work as well. You might not like the protagonist, you know, you might, they might just not be relatable to you. You might not see you've got anything in common. You might think they're an arsehole, in which case the oxytocin's not going. So you're not into it. You're not into it. So you need to really create the connection with the character. Then the cortisol, you want to really dramatize. What's the problem there? You know, hype it up, make it as big as possible, make it as in your face, and then you maximize the cortisol. So this is a way that you can think about it. You can think about it like, my analogy is always like music. And I'm like, if you imagine yourself like a record producer and you're like pushing up the dials, you're like, let's get the oxytocin up, you know, cortisol up, serotonin up, and all of this. And, you know, it's quite a fun way of thinking about it.
Yes, it's a fun way. And also, I read a lot of neuroscience and how it changes the brain, how it can help to learn or to memorize things or to improve on performance, right? And what I found fascinating is that oxytocin, for example, it opens up the window of neuroplasticity. It actually makes the brain more plastic and you learn much faster. And if you like have really low levels of oxytocin, you're not going to be learning that much, right? So like back to your point of if you don't like the character, you don't connect to that, you kind of like close your brain to whatever is coming next, right? And then you have norepinephrine or cortisol or adrenaline that sharpens that focus to absorb as much as possible of what's happening and what's communicated. And then dopamine, it's one of the things that wires our learning in, right? If you don't get dopamine, we don't remember much of that stuff. So that's why I'm like, that's why stories work and how they work. It's so powerful. I have to use more of them, even though I'm like not at all natural storyteller. I usually, probably like most people, I don't know, I would just go into facts, but then now I realize it's not going to produce any effect if I just do that.
Do you use it with your clients though, Angela? Do you use storytelling with your clients?
Now more. Before I used to sometimes use my personal stories, but I felt like, might be too much talking about myself here, right? Or about unrelated stuff. Like we got to get to the facts, we got to get to the tools, etc. But then again, I learned from people like yourself that I'm not being effective. And then it doesn't matter how many facts I'm going to give to that person. They're not going to remember. They're not going to use any of that. There's going to be no change. So now I'm teaching myself to use more stories.
Yeah. Good for you. Brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks to you again. Like your books and talks and content were really transformational for me. Thank you. And now I think I want to move. Now I'd like to move to the logical part of the brain, because before we were talking more about instinctive, emotional brain, how to connect that. And these are the connections we need to establish before trying to impact people or help people learn, right, or change their opinions. But also it is important, of course, for people to connect to the message logically, right? To think like, it sounds like true, or it sounds logical, or it sounds like a good idea, right? So how can people connect to the logical part of the brain, our prefrontal cortex? So people really suck up all this knowledge and put it into practice and have the confidence that it will work, or it's a good idea.
Well, this is where the ancient Romans were absolute geniuses, Angela, because they had all of these so-called rhetorical devices, ways of structuring sentences in order to make what you were saying sound more believable than it really is. And so the first of these is the rule of three, which the Romans used to call tricolon, which sounds like part of your digestive system, but which simply means making your arguments in threes. So as soon as you understand this technique, you can see that many of the greatest sound bites in history have been constructed this way. So veni, vidi, vici, government of the people, by the people, for the people, friends, Romans, countrymen. And it's an ancient rhetorical device, but a study by, I think it was the University of California in 2013 showed that people are more likely to believe an argument is true if it comes in 3 parts than in 4 parts. So it's a really simple takeaway. Just get your 4 bullet points to 3 bullet points. It's instantly going to be more credible, compelling, and convincing, just like that. It's really, really easy. So you can do it like that. The threes work. One of the other devices that works is rhyme. There's also separate research that shows we're more likely to believe something's true if it rhymes than if it does not rhyme. But I mean, thinking about things like no pain, no gain, or you've got to speculate to accumulate. These are things that sound as if they're true, but as soon as you shine a spotlight on it and really analytically think about it, you're like, that's bollocks, actually. No pain, no gain. What does that mean? You can achieve gain sometimes without pain. It's just not true. But it sounds convincing because of the rhyme. And one of the other things is like contrasting sentences or balancing sentences, because when people are thinking, they tend to think through their bodies, and you see people doing this. So, and for you, understanding body language, you might see when people are weighing up a decision, they might go, oh, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. So this is a metaphor for decision making, basically. So sentences that replicate that feel of something that's been thought through. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The state is your servant, not your master. This is not about holding you back. It's about helping you move forward. Sentences like this are brilliant. And a lot of inspirational life wisdom you find comes in these balancing statements. I mean, I love Simon Sinek. I think Simon Sinek's great fun, and I enjoy his books, but pretty much everything that he ever says is one of these balancing sentences. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That sounds genius. It sounds so profound. Whereas when you think about it, you're like, again, this is just nonsense, actually. It's not true. People don't, when I invoice people, I can't send someone an invoice saying for why I've done something. People buy the speech that I've written for them, or they buy the training that I've given them, or whatever, so it's absolute gibberish, but it sounds really profound because of that sentence structure. And a lot of people will take it as wisdom. It's like business Buddhism or something like that.
And I think, it's very important to learn these things, because in our world of really short attention span, like, you want to be aware that these devices are available, to use them to make people stop and listen, right? To grab their attention. And then you can expand and you can create, more complex points of view, and you can present more complex facts, etc. But learning these devices to grab someone's attention, like, sounds true, or right, sounds right, let me listen a little bit more to that, to see like what this person has to say. These are very powerful, and I'm also like learning to use them. For me, the problem is I have all these complex ideas, but it's difficult for me still to make them concise, make them sound right, make them rhyme, make them balance, right? But what I learned through, again, more like painful experiences, unless you do that, it's very hard to get people's attention and make them listen to what I have to say. Also,
this is the journey I think people go through, that you kind of learn through life. You learn how to be intellectual, you learn how to be analytical. If you go to university, this is what you learn to do. You don't learn rhetoric. And then almost after that, you need to learn how. So now you know how to think well, but now you need to know how to communicate well, because communicating thought, if thought is complex, and we all know, like, there's a million different perspectives on any issue, but if you present that full complexity to people, they're just not going to listen. So you need to, right, okay, we've done all of that. Now it's about communicating it. There's a beautiful bit actually in Barack Obama's autobiography where he describes almost this moment of realization when he was just campaigning in Chicago, that he realized that intellectual arguments just aren't enough on their own, that people turn off. And he was told by, like, I think it was David Axelrod, one of his early advisors, like, no, this is not how you connect with people. To get people listening, you've got to connect with their instincts and emotions. And I remember there was just a vague sense in his autobiography that he was a little bit disappointed in this. But then he realized, and it was like, well, that's how you've got to connect with people. And so you have this great intellectual man, very clever man, Barack Obama, very clever, yet he's campaigning with a slogan of, yes, we can. Literally, you could not, I don't think there has ever been a more simplistic, political slogan in history. I mean, it's well, I Like Ike actually was pretty, but he had to do it, and he appreciated that it wasn't that just being right, just having the arguments, just being intellectual was not enough on its own. It's about how you package it up as well.
Yeah. And I think I really understood that when I started to pay attention to what I pay attention to. And what I pay attention to are not complex arguments, at least not at first, or complex sentences, right? I'm also, I pay attention to something that rhymes, that is balanced, that connects to my emotions, that connects, tells great stories. I'm like, if it works for me, that's probably the same for other people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it has the effect of like putting your message in neon lights, actually, which, as you can see, the neon light behind me is shining up now. So that's the metaphor for the rhetorical devices. Exactly.
And also, what I remember is processing fluency. I remember in your, I think, TEDx talk, you compared how we package our speech to either, something that makes you feel like you're sipping on Prosecco, or something that makes you feel like you're chewing steak, right? And I also remember that very well, metaphor, etc. That, if you want people to absorb some message, what you're saying, you got to make it easy to consume, to digest. Otherwise, people,
And the reason I came up with that metaphor was actually because I was in Verona that day, and I had actually had a glass of Prosecco with my breakfast. I think it's only in Verona where they actually serve up Prosecco in a breakfast buffet. I'd never seen it before, and I was just like, hey, I'm doing my TEDx talk later. Why not? and highly recommended. Start the day with Prosecco.
Yeah. And, life, I think, is the best source for metaphors, like what we're going through. And then also it reminds me, if you want to connect to people's, imagery better, doing a lot of, not a lot, but some research on where they're coming from, like their profession, what they like, their background or environment, that really helps with that to come up with the right kind of images.
Yes, absolutely.
So Simon, I'm looking at my notes and thinking about what are some, let's maybe talk about breathing, because I believe it's also such a powerful tool to influence people and to change people's state and to change our own state. Can you tell our listeners about why breathing is important and how they can use it to influence other people and themselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of naturally tune into one another's breathing anyway, so you can use it in all sorts of ways. One thing which is very useful for my clients is in overcoming stress with speeches. So many people get nervous, even prime ministers, CEOs. If they don't feel nervous, there's a bit of a problem, actually. But if it runs out of control, there's a great little breathing technique which I use, 4-7-8 breathing, which quite a few people use, and it's just beautiful. And you just, so you breathe in through your nose for 4, and then you hold it for 7, and then out slowly through your mouth for 8, and it's just works like magic. You can be in a right state, or just feel like you're not focused properly on your work or whatever, and you just do that. It only takes you like 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and you're just like, oh, you can see people's shoulders relax when they do that. So it could be you can use your breathing to really calm yourself down, but equally you can use your breathing to really hype yourself up. If you're feeling like, oh God, it's just, I'm doing the same old thing again, I don't want to be doing this, then you can hype yourself up, just kind of actively hyperventilate before, like that, and get yourself like really, really excited. And some leaders actually need that. If they've been CEOs for like 6-7 years, they might not give as much of a shit as they did when they first started out. And you want to get them pumped up before they go out, before they're speaking to their people. And so doing that sort of thing. Funnily enough, I remember reading that Judy Garland used to do that before she went on stage, and she'd deliberately get her breathing like in a state in order to excite people. Because if you're wanting to excite people, then you write. For me as a writer, I'll deliberately write these short, breathless sentences. So like, coronavirus, conflict in Ukraine, climate change, and it sounds urgent because you're writing it in those super short sentences. So it sounds like you're hyperventilating. And it's so different to if you're talking about, well, we know that we've got these tensions in Ukraine at the moment, but these tensions have been going on for a long while now. And of course, this has always been a disputed land, and there's always been some tension about whether or not in Ukraine they look towards Europe or they look towards Russia, and different people feel in different ways. But you start there, now I'm breathing from deeper down, and people aren't going to give a shit. Whereas if you talk about, buildings reduced to rubble, families displaced, Putin losing the plot, like that, then so in that way, like, it's, do you want to excite people? Do you want to send people to sleep?
Yeah, and I think that's like the next level of mastery, not just being aware of that, but also using it with intention, with purpose. And yeah, I think when you can do that, you can really command people's minds, win people's minds. In my coaching, I always use breathing to change people's state. Like if I see they're anxious, or just not in the right place for example, our coaching, I either use 4-8 breathing, usually, just focus on the exhale, or if somebody is like, bored or sleepy, we can use hyperventilation. And the same for me, when I'm about to give public talk, I'm usually super excited, and for me to to be in the perfect state, I need to calm myself down. So I do the 4-8 breathing or 4-7-8 breathing, and then I'm just in the exact right zone. And I think knowing like where you are and where you need to go and using breathing is very powerful. And also, right, that if you want people to be in a certain state, you can use the sentences to certain structure of sentences to help people to get into the state, either giving them the impression of this hyperventilation or slow belly breathing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, after a while, you can internalize these techniques. So for anyone who does want to master them, I would recommend literally you just practice. I mean, I don't know if I can set out for your viewers a quick 6-step technique, the one that I do in TEDx Verona. And then my advice is literally practice this every day, just once a day for a week. And then by the end of that week, you're going to be using them instinctively. So you can write a speech using this 6-step model on any issue if you like. Just literally, if you want to practice, just look at what the top story in the news is on every day and do a speech using this structure. So step 1, 3 breathless sentences: broken homes, failing schools, sinker states. Sounds urgent, like you're hyperventilating. Step 2, 3 repetitive sentences, 3 sentences where you repeat the opening clause. Is it right that children are failing their exams at school? Is it right that criminals are not even being sent to court, let alone going to prison? Is it right that people are waiting months to see a doctor? Builds energy and passion. Step 3, 3 of those balancing statements. We're working together, not against one another, thinking about what we can do, not what we can't. Look into the future, not the past. Step 4, have a metaphor when you describe something as something which it is not. Step 5, 3 exaggerative sentences. We're working night and day, giving heart and soul, doing everything that we can to resolve this. And then step 6, end with a rhyme, because rhyme is sublime. And that's it. That's 6 little structure. They're the most powerful rhetorical devices. And any of your viewers who do want to master this, just practice that 6-step technique. It takes you 15 minutes, no more. Just do it every morning for a week. And by the end of that week, you are going to be speaking like a leader, guaranteed.
Well, thank you, Simon, for sharing this. And I'm actually repeating this, maybe not every day anymore, but at least once a week, right? The 6 steps, and then going through my notes that I put together from your books. So, I think at some point I will become a powerful speaker, working on that, right? But thank you so much for sharing this 6-step formula. Just practice, like with everything. And listeners on the other side, and you'll become a much more impactful speaker and going to get results that you are aiming for when it comes to communication or teaching, etc., or selling something you're passionate about. So Simon, again, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast, and such an entertaining guest, right? I think it comes from your background in music and singing. So thank you so much for bringing so much wisdom and so many stories and examples. Is there anything else you'd like to share at the end of this podcast with our listeners? Maybe like last piece of advice or wisdom or inspiration?
I think my final advice is really just to remember that everyone you're trying to win over is a human being, just like with a need to belong, just like you, with a need to be admired, just like you, with a need to be loved, just like you. So give people that. Make them feel they belong, make them feel admired, make them feel part of something bigger. And if you do that, you're meeting some of their deepest needs. And in return, they'll give you all the support you're looking for and more.
Such an amazing advice, right? We're all humans. So just remember that. Great advice. And where can people also connect with you? Like with your work, where would you like them to go?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Simon Lancaster, speechwriter. I'm on Twitter at Bespoke Speeches. My website is www.bespokespeeches.com, and you can get all of my books, including the new one, on Amazon, and it's in audiobook as well, and on Kindle. And I read the audiobook as well. It took a long time, but it was nice to be able to. It's the first time I've ever read one of my books from start to finish, because normally when you're writing it, you work on it in a disjointed kind of way, but it was lovely to read the whole thing from start to finish. So I would love to hear from some of your viewers. So if you've been interested in any of this, then do drop me a message.
Yeah, I encourage our listeners to connect with Simon and to learn from all his work. And I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. And just, I think parting advice from myself is that how we communicate is really important, because otherwise we have no chance of delivering and what we are trying to communicate to people's mind and actually changing something in people's life. Right? So the content is important, but also how you deliver is equally or more important.
Brilliant. Great stuff. It's been great talking with you. That's wonderful advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you to you, Simon. Thank you.
Brilliant.